Stay back, rookie. Sergeant Daniel Briggs snaps, waving off Elena Ramirez like she's a nuisance. She's smaller, younger, new. The other officers smirk. But stick around. They thought Ramirez was just a trainee. What they didn't know. She's ex-special response, trained to subdue threats alone. 5-on-1 odds? She's had worse. He mocked her in public. She dropped him in seconds. And when the footage goes viral, the only thing bruised harder than egos will be careers. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you discovered this video. We read all comments. The morning sun glints off Sergeant Marcus Thorne's silver whistle as he stands, ramrod straight, at Fort Drakenkeen's parade ground. His practiced eye catches every detail of the new recruit approaching. The too-perfect posture, the unnaturally fluid gait. The woman's silver hair catches the light, making his jaw clench. At 47 years of command experience, he's never seen anything quite like this. "Name and authorization," Sergeant Marcus Thorne barks, his voice carrying across the grounds with practiced authority. The other recruits freeze, phones discreetly appearing in hands, sensing the brewing confrontation. "Elena Vance, good, sir. Standard intake." Her voice carries an undertone that sets his teeth on edge. Too controlled, too confident for a new recruit. Sergeant Marcus Thorne's fingers tighten around his whistle, the metal warm against his palm. 27 years of maintaining Fort Drakenkeen's standards, and this woman dares to challenge them with her mere presence. He steps closer, invading her space, towering over her with practiced intimidation. "You expect me to believe you're a standard recruit?" His voice drips with contempt. "At your age? With that empty file?" He pulls out the practically blank document, waving it like a flag of defiance. The watching recruits' phones rise higher, red recording lights blinking. Elena Vance doesn't flinch, doesn't step back. Her eyes meet his with an intensity that sends an unwelcome shiver down his spine. "Permission to demonstrate my qualifications, Sergeant?" The words are perfectly respectful, but something in her tone makes his whistle feel suddenly heavy around his neck. "Oh, you want to demonstrate?" Sergeant Marcus Thorne's laugh echoes across the parade ground. "Fine. Show us all what you've got, Grandma. Training Course Alpha. Full combat load." He gestures to the notorious obstacle course that's broken countless young recruits. "Let's see how long you last before—" The words die in his throat as Elena Vance moves. There's no preparation, no hesitation, just pure, lethal grace. She flows through the course like water through cracks, each movement precise, powerful, perfect. The watching recruits gasp, phones live streaming what's quickly becoming the most viral military training video of the year. Vance's victory starts trending within minutes. Sergeant Marcus Thorne's fingers clutch his whistle tighter, knuckles white. "Impossible," he whispers, watching his authority crumble with each effortless maneuver she executes. Then comes the moment that will haunt his dreams. Elena Vance completes a move that hasn't been seen outside of classified combat footage. A move only one operative has ever mastered. "Sergeant Thorne!" A crisp voice cuts through his shock. Colonel Hayes appears beside him, tablet in hand. "I believe you've just had the honor of meeting Spectre 1. The whistle slips from Sergeant Marcus Thorne's nerveless fingers, clattering against the ground as realization dawns. He's just tried to humiliate the most legendary operative in modern military history. Looking at his reflection in her knowing eyes, one question burns in his mind. How will he survive the wrath of the woman he just challenged? Drop 1. if you think Sergeant Thorne just made the biggest mistake of his career. His whistle lies forgotten on the ground, no longer a symbol of authority, but a reminder of his monumentally poor judgment. The morning sun seems colder now, as Sergeant Marcus Thorne faces the growing reality that his perfect record, his rigid control over Fort Drakenkeen's training program, might not survive this encounter with the living legend he failed to recognize. Sergeant Marcus Thorne's fingers traced the polished surface of his whistle, a morning ritual that usually filled him with pride, but now left an unfamiliar bitter taste in his mouth. The pre-dawn air at Fort Drakenkeen hung heavy with more than just the usual military discipline. It carried the weight of his growing unease. "Formation!" His voice cracked across the training grounds with practiced authority, but his eyes fixed on Elena Vance, who took her place with that same maddeningly serene expression. The whistle felt heavier today, like the burden of 20 years of breaking recruits down to build them up. Memory fragments flickered through his mind. Sergeant Major Reynolds, his own drill instructor 15 years ago, teaching him the art of destruction. "Some must break so others can shine, Thorne. That's how we forge excellence." He'd embraced that philosophy, wore it like armor, used it to justify every cruel innovation in his training regimens. The morning's special drill began as usual. "Vance, front and center!" His voice carried across the yard, drawing worried glances from other recruits. But as she approached, maintaining that steady, measured pace that had begun to haunt his dreams, something shifted in his chest. A news article he'd dismissed last week suddenly surfaced in his thoughts. Military training methods under scrutiny, the hidden cost of breaking spirits. He'd scoffed then, but now, the research findings echoed. Psychological abuse in military training shows no correlation with improved combat readiness. His hand tightened around the whistle as Vance stood before him, her calm gaze meeting his. Behind her, he caught glimpses of younger recruits wincing, their faces mirrors of countless others he'd toughened up over the years. How many had he truly helped? How many had he simply broken? "Sir, ready for instruction, sir." Vance's voice carried neither fear nor defiance, just that unshakable composure that made his carefully constructed world tremble. The morning sun caught his whistle again, but instead of pride, he saw his reflection fractured across its surface. Each facet showed a different moment. A recruit's tears hastily wiped away, another's hands shaking too hard to complete a simple task, careers ended before they began, all under the guise of necessary hardship. His personal datapad buzzed. A message from command. "Training methodology review pending. Recent studies indicate." He didn't need to read further. The walls were closing in, not just on him, but on an entire system he'd helped perpetuate. "Have you ever questioned your methods, Sergeant?" Vance's quiet question cut through his thoughts like a knife. He hadn't asked her to speak. She'd broken protocol. Yet he couldn't find the rage that should have come naturally. Instead, his mind wandered to his own training days, to the moment he'd promised himself he'd never become like Reynolds. When had that promise morphed into this? When had building strength become an excuse for wielding power? The whistle hung heavy around his neck now, its chain feeling more like a noose. In the distance, he heard the familiar sounds of Fort Drakenkeen. Boots on gravel, cadence calls, the rhythm of military life. But for the first time, he heard something else beneath it all. The sound of spirits breaking. Type legacy, if you've ever questioned whether your methods of building others up might actually be tearing them down. His datapad buzzed again. Another article. The science of resilience. why breaking spirits doesn't build strength. The evidence was mounting, not just in studies and statistics, but in the eyes of every recruit who'd ever stood before him, just as Vance stood now. 30 years of military excellence built on quicksand, he muttered, his fingers tracing the worn surface of his whistle one more time. The morning sun continued to rise over Fort Drakenkeen, casting long shadows across the training ground, shadows that seemed to point accusingly at everything he'd believed, everything he'd become. I'll maintain absolute focus on Sergeant Marcus Thorne's perspective while expanding the unseen consequences section, ensuring his exact name is used consistently throughout the narrative. Sergeant Marcus Thorne's fingers trembled against the cold metal of his whistle as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort Drakenkeen's training grounds. His eyes narrowed at Elena Vance, completing her 100th perfect push-up, her breathing steady as a meditation bell. The whispers behind him grew more distinct now. No longer the respectful murmurs he'd grown accustomed to over 15 years of breaking recruits. "That's enough for the rest of you maggots," Sergeant Marcus Thorne barked, his voice carrying a tremor he couldn't quite mask. "Vance, give me another 100!" The whistle's shrill command split the air, but she didn't flinch. She never flinched. Lieutenant Rivera approached, his footsteps deliberate. "Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a word." The lieutenant's eyes held something Sergeant Marcus Thorne had never seen directed at him before. Pity. "The other instructors are concerned about your methods." Sergeant Marcus Thorne's hand instinctively reached for his collar insignia, his proud symbol of authority that had never felt heavier. "With all due respect, sir, I know what I'm doing. This recruit needs—" "No, Sergeant Marcus Thorne," Rivera cut him off. "I don't think you do." The training ground fell silent, except for Vance's controlled breathing. Sergeant Marcus Thorne watched her form, perfect, mechanical, inhuman. Each exhale seemed to mock him. She wasn't breaking, she was cataloging. Every drill, every command, every weakness in their training protocol. The security footage from the night before played on loop in Sergeant Marcus Thorne's mind. Vance in the combat simulation room at midnight, executing advanced military patterns that weren't taught at Fort Drakenkeen. Patterns he'd only seen in classified footage of Spectre operations. Have you ever felt your control slipping away? Watched as your carefully constructed authority crumbled beneath something you couldn't understand? Type "control" in the comments if you've ever faced your own powerlessness. Sergeant Marcus Thorne's throat tightened as he remembered the encrypted message on his terminal that morning. "Subject exhibits characteristics consistent with Spectre 1 protocols. Maintain distance. Do not engage directly." His fingers traced the outline of his whistle, no longer a symbol of command, but a reminder of his growing irrelevance. "Sir!" A junior instructor rushed forward, tablet in hand. "You need to see this." The screen showed security footage timestamps. Vance accessing the classified training modules, completing advanced combat simulations, analyzing instructor profiles. She wasn't just a recruit surviving his brutal regime. She was gathering intelligence. Sergeant Marcus Thorne's world spun as he watched the footage. Every punishment he'd dealt had been a gift to her, a chance to study their methods, their weaknesses, their limits. His obsession with breaking her had blinded him to the predator in their midst. The whistle fell from Sergeant Marcus Thorne's trembling fingers, clattering against the ground in perfect sync with Vance completing her final push-up. She rose, eyes meeting his with that same unnerving calm. In that moment, Sergeant Marcus Thorne realized he wasn't the hunter. He was the prey. "Dismissed," he whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. As the recruits filed away, Vance lingered for just a moment. Her slight nod felt like a final evaluation. Assessment complete. Type predator. If you've ever realized too late that you were being watched while thinking you were in control. The sun set on Fort Drakenkeen, casting Sergeant Marcus Thorne's shadow long and thin across the empty training ground. His whistle lay abandoned in the dust, its authority as hollow as his own. Tomorrow would bring more drills, more commands, more pretense of control. But now he knew, they all knew, who was really being tested. For the first time in 15 years, Sergeant Marcus Thorne was afraid to blow his whistle. Sergeant Marcus Thorne's fingers trembled against the cold metal of his whistle, his trademark symbol of authority at Fort Drakenkeen's elite training grounds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the combat arena, where 5 of his most seasoned instructors stood ready. His throat felt dry as he watched Elena Vance step onto the mat, her movements fluid and unhurried. "Show these real soldiers what you think you can do," Sergeant Marcus Thorne sneered, but something in her eyes made his stomach twist. The whistle shook slightly as he raised it to his lips. One sharp blast would begin this demonstration, this public humiliation he'd orchestrated to put this recruit in her place. The sound pierced the morning air, and what followed would haunt Sergeant Marcus Thorne for years to come. Elena moved like liquid mercury, flowing between his instructors as if they were standing still. The crack of her first strike echoed across the arena, precise, controlled, devastating. One instructor down. "Impossible," Sergeant Marcus Thorne whispered, the whistle slipping from his fingers. The metallic ping as it hit the ground was drowned out by the sound of another body meeting the mat. 2 down. Private Chen's phone captured everything. Sergeant Marcus Thorne saw the red recording light, but couldn't find his voice to stop it. His carefully constructed world began to crumble with each perfect movement, each calculated strike. 3 down. 4. The last instructor, Staff Sergeant Reynolds, Fort Drakenkeen's hand-to-hand combat specialist, lasted exactly 12 seconds longer than the others. When he fell, the silence that followed was deafening. Sergeant Marcus Thorne's whistle lay forgotten in the dust as trainees' phones emerged from pockets like flowers blooming after rain. The hashtag Spectre Takedown appeared on screens within minutes. Within an hour, the video had reached military channels across 3 continents. "You see, Sergeant," Elena spoke softly, but her words carried across the stunned silence. "Some barriers aren't meant to stand." She picked up his whistle, studied it for a moment, then placed it gently in his trembling hand. "Your authority was built on the wrong foundation." The base commander's call came as Sergeant Marcus Thorne watched the view count explode. Special Forces commanders worldwide were sharing the video, his inbox filled with messages from superior officers demanding explanations. Each notification sound felt like another nail in the coffin of his career. "I didn't just lose control of my training ground today," Sergeant Marcus Thorne thought, staring at the whistle that had once commanded instant respect. "I became the example of everything that needs to change." Type change. If you've ever witnessed someone shatter the barriers of impossible. By sunset, Hatched Spectre Takedown had reached every major military installation globally. Sergeant Marcus Thorne sat alone in his office, watching his carefully maintained system of power collapse under the weight of undeniable truth. The whistle lay silent on his desk, no longer a symbol of authority, but a reminder of the day everything changed. The official disclosure came at 2100 hours. Elena Vance was Spectre 1, the legendary operative whose existence had been mere whispers in military circles, Sergeant Marcus Thorne's challenge had given her the perfect opportunity to demonstrate why change was necessary, why the old barriers had to fall. As he finally left his office that night, Sergeant Marcus Thorne placed his whistle in a small box. Tomorrow would bring official inquiries, probably reassignment. But tonight, watching the video play again on his phone, he admitted a truth he'd fought all day. Sometimes defeat paves the way for necessary evolution. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Drakenkeen's courtyard as Sergeant Marcus Thorne sat in his office, staring at the whistle that had once symbolized his absolute authority. His trembling fingers traced the worn metal, remembering how just yesterday he had blown it with such arrogant confidence, certain he would expose Elena Vance as another weak recruit, unable to meet his standards. The classified files spread across his desk told a different story now. Each document revealed another layer of Spectre One's legendary missions, operations so classified even he, with his prestigious position, had never been granted access. His throat tightened as he recognized locations, dates, and outcomes that had changed military history, all bearing the subtle signature of the recruit he had tried to break. The greatest infiltration specialist wasn't targeting enemy bases, Sergeant Marcus Thorne whispered to himself, his voice hollow in the empty office. She was targeting our broken training system itself. The realization made his hands shake as he opened his drawer, placing the whistle inside with ceremonial slowness. The metal clinked against the wood. A final, defeated sound. Drop 2, if you've ever discovered you were completely wrong about someone. Through his window, Sergeant Marcus Thorne watched the morning drill formations, seeing them with new eyes. How many other exceptional soldiers had his rigid, outdated methods crushed? The thought made his chest ache as he remembered every harsh word, every impossible standard he had wielded like a weapon. Security footage from yesterday played on his monitor, Elena Vance's final moments at the facility. Her boots echoed through the corridors with measured precision, each step declaring not submission to the system, but mastery over it. Sergeant Marcus Thorne couldn't stop watching the way she moved, recognizing now the deadly grace of Spectre One that had been there all along. "Sir?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "General Morrison is here about the training reform proposal." Sergeant Marcus Thorne straightened his uniform, feeling the weight of transformation. "Send her in." He gathered the reform documents Elena Vance had left behind, her true mission's objective. The papers trembled in his grip as he realized every page reflected the changes she had proven were necessary. The whistle would remain in his drawer, transformed from an instrument of power into a reminder of humility. Tomorrow, it would join other artifacts in the fort's museum, labeled simply, "The Day Spectre One Changed Military Training Forever." Share this story if you believe true leadership means admitting when you're wrong. Hapt Thorne learned. Looking at his reflection in the office window, Sergeant Marcus Thorne saw what Elena Vance had forced him to confront. A man who had confused cruelty for strength, tradition for excellence. The morning sun highlighted the silver in his hair, earned through years of service, but never had he felt more like a student than in this moment. "Thank you, Spectre One," he whispered, straightening the reform proposals one final time. "You didn't just complete your mission. You completed mine." The words hung in his office like a confession, a truth that would reshape not just his legacy, but the future of military training itself. As General Morrison entered his office, Sergeant Marcus Thorne stood ready to embrace the change Elena Vance had orchestrated. His whistle lay silent in its drawer, But the sound of transformation echoed through Fort Drakenkeen's halls, the footsteps of progress, marching to a new rhythm of leadership and growth. Type reform if you believe one person's courage can change an entire system.